right patients. So on that topic, I would like to ask Nadir Ammour from Sanofi to the stage.
Good morning. Does it work? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for having us here. Thank you, Roche, for hosting these events. It was the first time for me to join, and it's very exciting to see the level of work and innovation that is happening within the community. I'm going to take you through some of the work that we've been doing in trying to unlock the ability to speed up recruitment and move into these data decision-making environments and leveraging what is available out there. It's click disclaimer, but what are we trying to achieve is really, and we have learned that yesterday and today, we are all trying to speed up the developments, address unmet medical needs, and get those innovations, medical innovation to patients sooner, but also at an affordable cost. The cost component and the time and the quality are still those parameters that are driving our developments. And we keep hitting the wall each time we're trying to innovate and move faster into that. I'm not talking regulatory environments, we talked about that already, but it is about that. And we have to create what are going to be the clinical development of tomorrow. It started already. It is not about talking what happens in 10 years. It is starting already, but we have to realize that we cannot keep doing what we've been doing over the last 25 years and try to increase it a little bit. I think this morning we've heard about that. We try to innovate, but on the top of the way we've been doing it up to now. So I think there is a thinking around how do we transform fundamentally the way we think, design, plan, and execute. We have, in recruitment space, we have a significant challenge. We all know that. There is a growing number of clinical trials running up. I was looking at trial.gov. On average, there is 60,000 open trials per year that are recruiting. And 60,000 trials open to recruitments is the huge effort. But we don't have that many sites or investigators that keep adding into the pool of capacity that we have. So we have a challenge there because we keep talking about that, but at the same time, the capacity to enroll and open sites is reducing. A number of investigators have participated to one trials, will not be willing to go into the next trials. Why? Because of the burden, because of the harassment, because of the complexity that we are putting there. On the same time, there is a huge promise. I mean, 60,000 drugs are being inventoried in clinical development right now, several vaccines. How do we move all those drugs through the pipeline? How do we kill the ones that will not have any effect so that we can direct the investment to the drugs that are more efficient and can be speed up to the developments? So we started with looking at what the sites are telling us. I mean, I keep hearing yesterday and today, we keep talking about patients and so on, but I think we are forgetting the sites and investigators into the pictures. And I think we have to reconnect and make sure that all the stakeholders, in particular the ones who are running the trials, are part of the discussions. And maybe next year we can have few representatives from sites into this conference to tell us about their experience, how do they see it from their sides, actually. But when we talk about the sites, this is what they are telling us. They're telling us that complexity of clinical trials, it is probably one of the, keep hearing that. And we keep having to the industry those initiatives about reducing the complexity of protocols. But at the same time, the science is advancing, is becoming more complex, and we are going into much more complex disease to try to target on that. The recruitment and retention is another issue. I mean, and that is, when we done the analysis, we find out that actually, although investigators are highlighting recruitment and retention is an issue, is the time it takes to review the patient files and to look at who are the patients that can be eligible that is consuming much of their times. We know all of that. We know, those numbers. But I think I'd like to highlight what we have on the right side there. Again, staffing is an issue. Trial enrollment is an issue. It's keep coming back in any survey that we do with investigators and sites. So fundamentally, we need to look at how do we address those elements and how do we unlock that. The feasibility, the way we're doing it right now, it's still fully predictable when you have sites responding to your feasibility questionnaires investigators are telling us we are happy to take the study. We can do 5 patients in the study. We go back internally and we change 5 to 3 because we kind of risk adjust that element. But at the end of the day, all our trials would have a percentage of sites that will have been open, but no patient recruited. And a number of sites will have maybe a single patient that you need to keep open for the duration of the study. So fundamentally, the way we are planning the studies and the information we have to plan the studies and execute are not robust enough so that we can get into more predictable results. We wanted to look at how do we change that? How do we get into an ambitions where actually we can reduce significantly the zero enrolling site? There are going to be always some sites that will not enroll, unfortunately. But how can we reduce that to a number that is appropriate? How do we accelerate the recruitment and not have the recruitment happening whenever it happens? How do we move from passive recruitment to proactive recruitment? And finally, all of that, how do we decrease the workload? If we do all of that and create more work, it doesn't work, actually. So we have to recognize that sites do not have the resources. We have investigators that are telling us, I don't have the resources to run your study. I don't have the resources to do more than 2 patients. So that's a question that we have fundamentally to address. At the same time, there is a fantastic opportunity where most of the clinical research centers are now having their patient dossier in electronic formats. So one side there's an opportunity there, there's an issue there. How do we connect both of them? So we've been given a mission. 2 years ago, 2 to 3 years ago, we've been asked, how can we develop a methodology or some solutions that will enable sites to query their EHR systems, look at the patient level data to make sure that we can inform our site selection and recruitments. It's not about fundamentally getting some scientific valid insights, it's to get signals that can help with the decision making. But also, how can we reduce the site burden? So we should not develop solutions or technologies, but that will create more burden to the sites. We have to reduce the site burden. And finally, how can we do it in a way that this can potentially become a trial options for other patients being seen at the institutions, but they're not aware that a trial is there and there is nobody that can match them up to potential trials. So there is 2 focus areas that we looked at: feasibility, where we can look at how can we inform some informations. It is not replacing the investigator response. It's an additional insights, a signal that can back up the information from the investigators. And then when we get into the recruitment, how do we make it supported by appropriate data mining? We started to understand the perspective from the sites, and we asked the questions about where do you see EHR to provide value into these activities. And it was not a surprise. Prior to site selections, to inform really the planning activities, prior to following the site selection to prepare for the site initiation visit and find those patients, and of course during the recruitment. This is coming back from investigators. This is research that we've done and surveys that we've done that was confirming our assumptions. So we started with that. But they had also some challenges. The data into the EHR may not be appropriate for that purpose. And that we had to shift our thinking. All what we have seen in industry right now is trying to match the inclusion-exclusion criteria to the data into the EHR. And that doesn't work because inclusion-exclusion criteria are being designed for randomizations. They're not being designed for finding the patient who could potentially get into the study. So we had to shift our mindset on that. We also took some learning from other projects. We've been part of this IMI EU Pearl project, but there was a specific work package focusing exactly on that questions. I had the privilege to co-lead that work package, who kind of tested the assumptions and the work with larger academic and industry consortia. And we have also developed some of those processes there. We had generated a couple of deliverables that was informing our own roadmap within Sanofi to move this forwards in a very pragmatic way. Don't try to shoot the moon. Just start by walking before you can run. And there is also some body of evidences from publications that are backing this up. But the questions, I think this morning we've heard that, is all of that exists. How do we operationalize it? How do we take it into daily activities? Because on the surface, it works. But when you get into implementing it in your studies, then you hit some other type of challenges there. So what we've done, we essentially created a mini consortia with clinical research centers in various parts of the world. We had clinical research investigators from sites, and we also invited their counterpart at the site who is working on their bioinformatics departments. They usually don't talk to each other, so we realized that we have to bring them up together into the same meetings. And they become part of the project team, actually. So we work with them to understand what's going to be their motivations, what are the blockers from their perspective, what is the value from them, and how can we design it so that it does work for them, for the sites. It's up to them to execute that. So we had a number of workshops to go through all those questions. And one of the things that come back from the sites was essentially a couple of recommendations. They told us the query that we can run for feasibility should be different from the query that we should run for patients. It's not the same. For feasibility, we only need a patient count to get a rough idea as a signal. When you get to the recruitment, then we can spend a little bit more effort. And come back into the workloads. There is no point of spending weeks of effort at the feasibility stage to answer some questions about, is it going to be a study that has enough patients at your sites? You cannot spend weeks on that because it is kind of a space where the investigator will not spend more than 1 hour. We cannot spend weeks on that. So we tailored the query to really provide a signal on that. If the study is confirmed and the study is implemented, then we can spend a little bit more time into designing a more fine-grained query to identify the patients. We also learned that this is not real-world data. A number of things that we have faced was everyone was coming from the real-world data methodology, and we finally find out that it is not the same methodology, actually. Real-world data studies need to generate scientifically validated outcomes, at least acceptable outcomes. Here we are generating insight for decision-making, operational decision-making, and at the end of the day, the expert is making the decision. And then there was a lot of things around how do we make it easy for the site? They should not be spending hours and weeks. How do we make it working for a large variety of sites? Some have rich data, some have less data. And how do we to make it in a way that we don't end up with, if we have a vendor, we can do it. If we don't have a vendor, we cannot do it. How do we do it with multimodalities? Site can run it by themselves. We can use vendors in certain instances, but also recognize that not all the sites will be at the same pace. The key point was to facilitate the collaboration within the site between the clinical trial units team and the bioinformatic teams. When you talk to the bioinformatic teams, they are excited. Yes, we can do that. We can mine the data. We can help find the patients. When you talk to the clinicians, we don't need that because we know our patients. Yeah. So there's also some part of change management that needs to happen there. And it was interesting, the investigators are usually considering that they don't have a problem for recruitment. It's our protocols that have a problem, not themselves, actually. But I mean, when you go beyond the discussion points, then we can find a mechanisms where people are realizing, yes, okay, it's fine. I can understand there is some value because actually the notion of providing a pre-screener is something that resonates. But the key point was to keep that communication with sites and keep co-developing that with sites. We had some challenges on data privacy, on availability of data, and most importantly was this educations and change management and generating evidences that we can really work with data and not just approach sites with intentions and hopes and so on. So it was really something that has built up over time. Quickly, I will quickly get into that, but we have 3 steps, and I will get into that in 2 minutes. But we have developed workflows, steps. Who needs to do what? At which points? What is the input? What is the output? What happens from the sponsor side? At which point we have discussions with the site? What happens within the sites? It was a template. It is not something that is expected to become a golden rule, but it was something that sites were telling us we need that. At least we can have some template that can help us navigate the internal collaboration that is required within our organizations. And that come up from this IMI project. We also come up with agreements in terms of type of data that can, or medical informations that are relevant from where we can identify appropriate criteria. Demographics, conditions, medications, lab, clinical encounters and procedures. And when we look at that, this is where we are selecting the criteria that end up into the pre-screening or the feasibility EHR query. So this is reflecting essentially what data are more commonly available and more commonly accessible in hospitals. Some hospitals are telling us we can do more. We already have NLP's capabilities. So even if you have some criteria that may not be into a structured formats, we can try to get them up, which is very encouraging because when you talk with some of those advanced institutions, they're already one step ahead. Numbers, because it's nice to talk about what we can do, but in terms of numbers, this is evaluation that we've done, running a comparative analysis between results provided through the feasibility questionnaire and the same questions, which is how many patients do you see in your clinic per year in that indication run from an EHR. And then we ask the questions, with these new numbers that are coming from the EHR query, would you change your predictions in terms of numbers of patients recruited? And then we had some questions that are more qualitative with respect to the interest from the investigators. Do you believe this can provide more value? And those sites and investigators were not the one that we have engaged into the initial discussions. But in most of the sites, they found more patients, and their results were, I am a little bit more confident, I can meet those recruitment targets, or I can put more efforts. Interestingly, in Germany, the investigator was telling us, I cannot do more patients because I don't have the staff. And when I asked my colleagues in Germany, did you know that? No, we didn't know that. If you knew that they were lacking staff, we can add and we can provide and we can offer to have a little bit more support into that. So there is, I think that communication is also, hindering. But there's a strong interest into advancing that. In terms of, we're into the launch phase right now, and we are combining different mechanisms, but essentially we have a pipeline of 12 studies where we are starting to deploy that. 7 countries. We have a number of network centers, particularly in the US and in Europe, and 22 unique sites. It's some single sites where this is being deployed in a number of studies. But right now, through that mechanism, the sites have identified close to 700 patients. And there is a number of them that are into the screening procedure right now. I don't have the numbers and randomizations, but I know at least in few cases where one of the sites has identified patients they didn't know that was visiting the sites. They called the patients, they called the physician of the patients, and that patient has been finally randomized in that trial. So it was really illustrating the fact that, there are patients there, the investigator may not know the patient exists, but you can bring them in. But that requires that the sites internally will develop the mechanisms so that the internal referral works as well. The 3 pillars that are now being strengthened for sustainability and scaling up is we do need to develop phenotypes of EHR phenotypes of the patients, which is essentially the representations from the data of the target populations that we need for the studies. We need then to have distribution mechanisms to the sites. For some of the sites, we are sending an Excel file with the criteria and for them to run it. In other sites, we may have some vendors, and we also work with federated data networks that are in existence out there. And then we have the final step, which is the chart reviews, where we are using also some tools with AI that can read documents and confirm that the criteria is documented properly, and we are expanding on that actually. It's an emerging market. There is a number of people there. I think the key message here is there is a lot of new players in that field, but what I see also is players coming to the ability to use the patient's portal and patient data to offer that services. In the US, this is happening. In Europe, it's happening as well. This is probably something that will take 5 more years. But we see already some people who are leveraging the ability for citizens to access their own EHR data and plug this up into screeners where the patients can also come into it. In terms of takeaways, collaborations is key. I think that's really something that we've learned. I mean, we need to work with site and investigators. We cannot just do that. And we cannot expect to deliver all those innovations without the investigators and the site participating into that. And I think the other thing that I would like to highlight, don't try to be perfect. We need to start, and we need to create iterations of learnings, de-risking that, but we have to do it and improve it over time as opposed to trying to get it right and then deploy it. Sites are willing to participate. There is, for them side also is something that is an issue. And what we have done here at Sanofi was also to say, we are not doing that only for Sanofi. We want sites eventually to adopt that as a standard practice for any trials that they would have, whether it is a sponsored study from academia or from public funding, if they can move into that. And that is the first step, because we know that AI will come very soon, and we know that AI holds a lot of promise, but we have to start somewhere. And finally, for AI, I mean, a lot of people are also concerned about AI. It won't replace people. AI will replace people who do not use AI. That's the motto that we have at Sanofi right now, and we're moving with recognitions that at the end of the day, we still need some expert that make the decisions. It's not the tool that are making the decisions. I think I'm right on time.
Well, merci, Nadir.
Thank you.
I've heard boiling the ocean a lot, but I really like not shooting the moon in that context. Nevertheless, it seems like a very impressive effort launched. We have time for one short question. Yes, in the back, please.
Hi, Suki Balendra from Imperial in London. So I am from a site perspective, just to reassure you. The question is, we've seen in the UK system actually performance metrics making sites be very conservative about their target setting. And I wondered if you'd found that in other countries as well.
Thank you for the questions. I think what we are finding is this requires that we have a disciplined approach when we work with sites. We cannot just go to site and tell them we want to mine your data because we have a study coming up. This doesn't work, actually. We work in the UK. We have good successes in the UK, actually, right now. Our teams in the UK is working. We're also working with the NHS in the UK. But I think what we're finding is it does require that we approach that properly and don't just run into the site and say, what is your IT department? I want to get some data from it, actually. So it's really important steps. And we are learning that this, what we call the onboarding phase, is critical. Something that I did not mention is also the fact that we have to recognize that this requires some time and material at the sites, and we need to be ready to compensate for that work that needs to be done, actually. So that's really something that we're learning from that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next.